street, I am told, is paved with pure gold, and the sun it shall never go down. There are evergreen trees that been low in the breeze, and their fruitage is brighter than gold. There the throne of God stands in that fair.
You shall thus observe my statutes and keep my judgments, so as to carry them out, that you may live securely on the land. Then the Lord will yield it, the land will yield its produce, so that you can eat your fill and live securely on it. But if you say, what are we going to eat in the seventh year if we do not sow or gather our crops? Now, the seventh year, remember, is the Sabbath year. Then I will so order my blessing for you in the sixth year that it will bring forth the crop for 3 years. When you are sowing the 8th year, you can still eat the old things from the crop, eating the old until the 9th year when its crop comes in. So Israel is commanded to carry out God's statutes. That is nothing new. When did the idea of carrying out the statutes of God first get introduced? Genesis 2. Genesis 2. It's been around for as long as man's been on the earth. Not a new idea. This shouldn't catch him by surprise. But he attaches a promise here. He says, if you carry out my statutes and you honor my judgments and observe them all, what's going to happen? You will live securely in the land. That's really what everyone wants, right? Security. And what is involved in living securely in the land? Well, yeah, but what does it mean to live securely? Okay, have your needs met. So you don't have to worry about what kind of things do you not have to worry about? Food. If you don't have food, then you lack security. What else do you not have to worry about? Okay, safety, particularly from what? Invaders, people from outside. You're not going to lose your property. You don't have to worry about. God is talking to them about years down the road in these texts. He's saying, when the time comes that you start worrying about that seventh year, understand I'll provide in the sixth year enough food for 3 years. It'll cover you all the way to the end of the 9th year. So there's no lack of security for the future. We spend an awful lot of time fretting about those things, worrying about what's going to happen if this happens, what's going to happen if the economy goes south, what if the stock market crashes again like it did in 29. What did people do in 1929 when the stock market crashed? I'm sorry? Okay, they rushed to the banks. That was what the lucky people did. They struggled, they lost everything. That also is what the lucky people did. You know what a lot of people did? They jumped out of the building and committed suicide because they thought they had no future and that they couldn't recover from the circumstances that they were in. That's what happens when you lack security. You lose hope. And hope is fundamental for mankind. It is true that every individual that voluntarily takes their life does so because they feel hopeless. You can debate why they get there or how they get there or other things about their condition, but fundamentally the one consistent thing is they feel hopeless. Yes. Well, in 9/11, they were jumping out because they figured they were going to burn to death anyway, and maybe they were just weighing their options and taking the one that they thought would be better. If I'm going to die rather than burn to death, I'll die when I hit the ground, which will be much faster. Um, but again, I was going to say that's a different story, and it is a different story, but it's the same thing. They got to the point where they didn't have any security. They were not secure in their person. They were not secure in their place, and they became desperate and acted in ways that they ordinarily would not have acted. Um, how do we maintain security? Well, he says here, carry out God's statutes, keep my judgments, and observe them, and you will live securely. Does that mean that life will always be perfect? No. Now, when you get into Deuteronomy, there's a big section of Deuteronomy, again, leading up to their taking possession of the land. And he's giving the laws and the rules about how they're going to maintain possession of the land. And he tells them, if you keep these statutes, then you'll dwell in the land forever. However, he says, if you do not keep these statutes, you will not. This is the same thing, just a whole lot less words. If you want to dwell securely, carry out my statutes and follow my judgments. The land's going to yield its produce. That's verse 19. That's kind of a promise as well. The land will yield its produce. You will get food. You'll eat your fill and dwell securely, is how he puts it there. So then the anticipated question that we mentioned a moment ago, well, what about that 7th year when you told us we couldn't plant? He says, that's going to be taken care of too. I'm going to see to that. And this, of course, has very clear echoes to the idea of the collection of manna not being done on the Sabbath, and yet they had enough to survive until the next day that they could work. He's Instead of talking about a day here, though, he's talking about what? A year. What can God do? Well, he can feed 5,000 people with 2 small fish and 5 loaves. Uh, he can provide. So the Lord answers, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to provide for you. I have that covered. I haven't missed something. I haven't forgot about something. I haven't asked you to do something that's going to ultimately harm you. What do they need to have? Faith, conviction. Move forward with certainty that God will do what he said he would do for them. They're going to continue eating from the old crop until the harvest from that 7th year comes in fully. Obedience requires faith. Israel needs to trust God's promises. But again, you see in this place in the Bible, and this is always the case, at least in every place that I've found, that very close to the promises of God are the requirements of God to be obedient. You just don't find the promises of God apart from a faithful people who listen and follow and do what he asks. Now, that's all important, but it seems somewhat out of place because we get right back into a discussion of this land sale stuff. So look at verses 23 through 34. We may not go that far, but we'll see. Probably stop at 28 to begin with. Verse 23, the land, moreover, shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine. Who's talking? God. For you are but aliens and sojourners with me. Thus, for every piece of your property, you are to provide for the redemption of the land. If a fellow countryman of yours becomes so poor he has to sell part of his property, then his nearest kinsman is to come and buy back what his relative has sold. Or, in case a man has no kinsman, but so recovers his means as to find sufficient for its redemption, then he shall calculate the years since the sale and refund the balance to the man to whom he sold it, and so return to his property. But if he has not found sufficient means to get it back for himself, then what he has sold shall remain in the hands of his purchaser until the year of Jubilee. But at the Jubilee it shall revert, that he may return to his property. Now, I'm working on a lesson for Sunday morning that's going to pull from this text. I hope I don't conflate my comments, but he starts off verses 23 and 24 telling us ultimately that we don't get to sell the land in perpetuity. We don't get to just, okay, it's my land, but I'm gonna sell it to Jana, and now it's Jana's land. Now we got to go back and remember, how did they get the parcel of land that they got? I'm sorry? From God. Okay, so God said, okay, you're going to divide the land. This is how I want you to divide it. From this area to this area to this area, this belongs to this tribe. And it's going to be divided among them based upon their families. So there were family territories, there were clan territories, then there's the national territory. That little piece of land that you got control of as your family, it belonged to you in the sense that he says you can't sell it to somebody forever. It can't transfer to another family. You're either going to have to redeem it back or it'll come back to you in the year of Jubilee. But eventually, the family that owns the land is going to get it back. Now, that becomes extremely important in some other things later in the scriptures. And we'll talk, like I said, we'll talk about that Sunday a little bit more. But what well, the reason, let's just focus on the reasoning here. What's the reasoning he gives for this law, for this regulation? Why can't I transfer my land to somebody else? It's not my land. It's God's land. And if I don't own it, what do I not get to do? I can't authorize other people to act. By the way, that applies to everything. If I take something from your house and sell it to somebody, what does our law say about that? Okay. I'd get in trouble for stealing. That's what I'd get in trouble for. In some way, fashion, or fortune. Whether it's outright theft or fraud or whatever it may get called, it's going to get called something, and I'm going to get in trouble for it because everyone recognizes that if you don't own it, you don't have authority over it. What about the church? Who owns the church? It's God's church. Now, we talk about my church, but it's not really my church. We talk about our church, but it's not really our church. It's the Lord's church. If it's his church, who gets to dictate, control, who exercises authority? God. Yes, ma'am. um, so there's a fundamental lesson here that he gives as the reason for this law, but that fundamental lesson applies to ownership of author. What about myself? Who owns me? God. Okay, and there's two levels of this, by the way. There's two levels of this. Fundamentally, everyone lives and moves and has our very being at the hand of God, right? I don't exist of my own accord. I was made. That's number one. So, at a very fundamental level, my life is not my own. Paul argues from that when he's arguing to the Athenians in Acts 17 as why those folks in Athens needed to be concerned about the God that Paul was telling them about, because in him you live and move and have your very being. And so you need to listen to him. Then, as Wesley pointed out, as Christians, we're told you are not your own. You were bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body. But what price was I bought with? The blood of Christ. Christ laid down his life to buy me back from sin, to redeem me, which, by the way, ironically, this is talking about redemption. So ownership is important, and the idea of ownership is important, and we can understand where authority lies when we understand ownership. I'm not saying this is a good way to view things. I'm saying this is the way people do view things. I want to clarify what I'm about to say. But ultimately, parental rights arise in most people's mind from what? These are my children. They're mine. So I get to tell them what to do. You don't get to tell them what to do. I get to decide what's good for them. You don't get to decide what's good for them. Now, that is not where parental authority arises from, but that is where most people think parental authority arises from. Fact of the matter is, they're not my children. I'm stewards over them. Their life belongs to God. And that is where my authority over them arises. Parental authority arises from Ephesians 6 and other places in the Bible where God specifically says that fathers and mothers have specific authority over their children. And with that comes responsibility that you'll answer to God for in how you exercise that authority. Because ultimately, they're not ours, they're His. And we're acting as stewards over His. That is part of what they are being taught. All of this that you're about to enjoy. Now, they're fixing to go into the land that flows with milk and honey, and they're going to be prosperous, and they're going to very quickly become one of the most prosperous nations in history at that point. And they need to understand that every bit of it is God's, not theirs. And that completely changes the way that you handle things. It's what creates the entire legal system around ethics and fiduciary responsibility that says, wait a minute, there are certain things that you might have authority over, but they don't really belong to you. So your duty is not to yourself, your duty is to whoever it actually belongs to. And basically, they're being told, your duty is to me because it's mine. That's the whole point in him saying, the reason for all this is because the land is mine, it's not yours. Who, in fact, secured them the land? God. It wasn't their prowess. It wasn't because their army was so much bigger and powerful than all the nations that they fought against. They won those battles because God allowed them to win those battles. So then he introduces this idea of a near relative being able to redeem property. So you've sold your property now. The goal ought to be what? Get it back as quick as you can. And he has a couple of things in line. Now, why would you sell something? Why would you sell your property? I'm sorry? Okay, hard times. That's exactly right. Because they needed something, because they were poor. They came into a situation where they didn't have either enough money or enough goods to care for themselves, and so they need from someone else. And so, okay, you sell your property, and because it's hard times, because I've become poor, um, obviously I can't redeem it back now. That's the reason I just sold it. If okay, theoretically you could do this according to the law. This would be appropriate. Okay, I could sell my land to Wesley and then redeem it back immediately for the exact same price that he just paid me for it, because that's what I would owe, and I'd have redeemed my land. Problem is, I don't have it. That's the reason I sold it to begin with. I don't have it to do that. So he says, first order, if you become poor and you sell your property to someone else, and the language is very interesting to me, your nearest kinsman has this responsibility. Now, how far removed could that kinsman be? It could theoretically be quite removed. If you're an older person and all of your near kinsmen have died before you, and it may be a second cousin twice removed, but that's your nearest kinsman, and that's who the responsibility falls to. Your nearest kinsman can come and redeem what's been sold. But if there is no redeemer, he says, and verse 26 is interesting, there is no redeemer, but later you become prosperous and you acquire sufficient means, then you do it yourself. And so ultimately, what this is saying is that whoever's connected to that land, the nearest person connected to that land within that family, if they're able, they redeem it. And if it comes back to you, then that's fine. You get past your hard times, you pay your debtors off, you get things squared away, and now I've come into some more money, and business is better, and okay, I can buy it back now. Well, then you do that. But and the way you do that is by repaying the balance. And remember, we saw earlier that the way the price was set by the number of harvests that remained. And so if it's been 2 years, then it's 2 years worth taken off of it. You pay the balance, pay what's left. And so it becomes a prorated kind of thing. And the closer you get to the next Jubilee, the smaller you owe back. If you just can't ever get there, if it can't be redeemed, if there's nobody to redeem it, then ultimately who's going to do it? God. And he set the time and the place. It'll remain with the purchaser until Jubilee, but in the Jubilee year, it reverts back to the original owner. God pays the price. Loss is not always permanent. There's a lesson in this. Loss is not always permanent. The Lord builds redemption into the structure of Israel's inheritance so that what has been lost may be restored. Now, again, we make spiritual application of these things. This son of mine who was lost has been found. He was dead. Now he is alive. Redemption. Yes.
See later in the New Testament that these Israelites, as this was passed down over the centuries, understood this, that whatever they had belonged unto God. On the day of Pentecost, when Peter preached the first gospel, and all the Jews from around the world were stuck in Jerusalem because of certain issues that were going on.
Don't trample on my lesson Sunday morning.
And they sold their possessions and their land and laid it at the apostles' feet.
We're going to talk at length about that Sunday morning.
The other two did the same thing, but they didn't do it because they weren't following what you were talking.
Right.
That Genesis 5. They said they gave all what they earned from their possessions and their land, their whatever. But I don't want to go too far.
Yep. Well, I'm looking at it from a different perspective, but we're going to talk in detail about that Sunday. That is a key text to the application of things that we're talking about Sunday morning. This stuff we're covering right now, and that is interesting that you think of that text, but that is a fitting connected text. And this is exactly how they viewed the world. And when we read Acts 4, for instance, we don't always understand it the way it really is applied unless we think about this. And so we'll talk about that a little bit Sunday as well. This stuff was not theirs. They were given the land. And by the way, when they entered into the land, if y'all remember back to when we studied the book of Numbers, when they finally did enter into the land, the very last thing God said to them before they went into the land was what? You don't get this because you're so good. It's not because you're so righteous that you're inheriting this land. It was altogether for God's purposes. Why was God redeeming this people? And that's what's going on here. God is redeeming this. He redeemed them out of their bondage to Egypt. He bought them back. His promise to Abraham, which ultimately is to redeem the whole world. He's redeeming them as part of his process to redeem mankind from sin. That's what's going on here. That's what all of these laws are ultimately governing. God is not inventing new legislation, coming up with good ideas. God is doing what is right and what is essential and necessary. And when he hands down these laws, it is what that's where he starts with them. When you deal with these things with your neighbors, when and that's what this whole section starts off, you deal with them justly. Now, what does it mean to deal with someone justly? To be fair and honest, to be right in the way you did not take advantage of people. How do I not take advantage? How do I do things right? Well, I do them the way that God explains. Yes, ma'am. Well, we'll probably get into that a little bit more in subsequent chapters, but it's most likely that you'd be selling it to the people around you, which would be other people from the nation of Israel. But it could be. We'll see. We'll see what God says later about it. Verses 29 and 30. Likewise, if a man sells a dwelling house in a walled city, then his redemption right remains valid until a full year from its sale. His right of redemption lasts a full year. But if it's not bought back from him within the space of a full year, then the house that is in the walled city passes permanently to the purchaser. Throughout his generations, it does not revert in the Jubilee. So houses within walled cities, there's a carve out. A house in a walled city has a time limit on the redemption. I have to stop. But I want you to think about that. Think about the significance of being within the walls and without the walls, and what kind of implication that may have along the lines of the things that we've been talking about. And we will pick up with this and then move forward into verses 31 through 34 and following after that. Interestingly enough, what he moves on to next is the houses of the Levites. And then caring for poor brethren. And you know what's interesting about all this? Remember that this whole conversation about selling property is because you have become poor. Something you have to do, not something that you want to do, something you have to do. So we have to keep that in mind. This whole section is about the poor. And I'll stop talking before I give away.
I have heard of a land on a faraway strand. In the Bible the story is told, where cares never come, never darkness nor gloom, and nothing